Hey guys, welcome to the Explanation Pro. In this video, I am gonna talk about the 2015 war drama film, 13 Minutes. As usual, there will be spoilers ahead, so take them with a grain of salt and let's get started. The movie is set up in 1939 in Germany. It starts with a man named Georg Elser setting up a bomb to kill the famous Nazi leader Adolf Hitler. The bomb was supposed to go off at 9:20 on the 8th of November. But Hitler survived as he left 13 minutes earlier, hence the title. The officers eventually find the man responsible for the blast. When they arrest George, they find bomb construction-related equipment and a red badge that was a symbol of the Communist Party whose beliefs were against Hitler. The officers start a conversation by saying, "Hail Hitler," and George responds with, "Have a good day," and does not speak up after. The officer asks him for his name and date of birth, but George refuses to answer. The officer repeatedly asked the same, but George stood still stubbornly. The scene continues with a flashback. George was a musician with commitment issues. He was on a beach playing an instrument and fooling around with a girl and moving on to another one as things seemed to get serious with the earlier one. In the next scene, he gets a letter informing him to go back to his hometown as soon as possible because his drunk father sold 2 more parts of their land and things are only getting worse back there. As George still refused to answer the officer, they decided to take things to the next level. The stenographer let the scene as things were about to get violent. George was tied up to a frame with metal chains. They started to hurt him brutally and he still hasn't said a word. He screamed, he bled, he vomited but did not utter a single word. When he gets back to his hometown, he meets his mother and goes upstairs to find his father lying drunk. Their occupation was carpentry. While he was trying to cut a log of wood with a saw in very bad condition, his father tries to lend a hand. But the interaction between the father and the son ends up in an argument about how his father should stop drinking and be more responsible. The officers have a conversation among themselves. They do not believe that George did this all by himself. They wanted to get a written confession out of him to release to the press. They thought of a plan to bring in his relatives to get him to speak up. George was thrown into a room with cuts and wounds all over his body. The next day, the officer offers George a glass of water and asks him to speak up. He said that he finds it hard to believe that a native German developed such deep hatred toward Hitler that he tried to kill him. But George doesn't speak up. Later he meets a woman named Elsa and is very intrigued by her. Even though she is married, he tried to make a move. Elsa was trying to show a dance form called tango from South America to her friends and asked George to join. Things get a little intense and she leaves to find her husband. She told him she wanted to leave, but he replied rudely to her and she went out to get some air. Meanwhile, the people around start discussing how the Red Party lost and the NSDAP is the biggest party around there and things get heated. George saw how people started to argue and left the scene to find Elsa. They have a conversation about films and end up kissing. As people started coming out, Elsa left. A guy called George a coward for not taking a stand in the fight earlier. He replied that he is okay with being a coward because he believed that violence doesn't achieve anything. They bring up Elsa as a way to threaten him. She asked him if he did this and they took her away. He took a second to pray for Jesus to come back and finally spoke, telling Elsa had nothing to do with the blast and to leave her alone. The officer said he'd do that only if George cooperated with them. He finally said that his name was Elser Johann George and he was born on January 4, 1903. The stenographer started writing every word he said. The officer questioned George about the Red Front membership badge. He claimed that he was never a Communist Party member. He said that he didn't even attend the meetings. But the officer refused to believe that an apolitical person planned such a huge-scale bomb blast on his own. They started questioning George about how he gained access to the materials required to make a bomb. He explained how he created it on a piece of paper. Elsa and George were having an affair even though she was married and had children. Elsa found comfort in George as her husband was reckless and abusive. Later on, a member of the Red Front approached George for help as all the other party members were arrested for being a part of a rally the other night. George offered to help him, but it was too late by then. They arrested his friend. The officer spared George but warned him that they will come back later and their target is going to be him and his neighbors. George and his family went to a harvest festival organized by the NSDAP. They are belittled by the hosts because of their status and their belief systems. The festival continued with a meeting that praised Hitler and made promises for a better country with better communication, pavements, and more. Back to George's current situation, the officer offered him a slice of bread and questioned how he acquired the gunpowder and dynamite. George said that he used to work at a steelworks and that was where he stole 250 pieces of gunpowder and stored them in his wardrobe. He also told that he stole dynamite from the quarry at night. The officers verified George at the steelworks. George met Elsa's children. They loved each other so much that they decided to move out of the country with the children and start fresh. But before that, George wanted to earn some money and Elsa wished to get divorced from her abusive husband. George moved into the basement of Elsa's house by signing an agreement with her husband. Her husband did not know that they were involved. One day, George noticed that his fellow friend was humiliated in public for interacting with Jews. Keeping up with this, his friend who worked for the Nazis in the steelworks came for a short period. Even though the locals were not supposed to interact with the workers, George and Elsa fed the man. He discussed the inhumane conditions of the workers in the factory. But he also mentioned to George that they are taking in more workers and that George should join if he needs the money. Although George did not like the way people were being treated in the country, he considered that option because Elsa was the first girl he was serious about and he wanted to make things work. Elsa was a little skeptical about the whole thing because they might get into trouble if anyone knew about the interaction between them and a worker. Meanwhile, the officers brought in a professional to verify if George was telling the truth about making the bomb all by himself. George answered all the questions with accuracy. He explained every minute detail to the professional. Therefore, he concluded that George was right about building the bomb on his own. They were astonished by how accurately and intuitively he answered. He even brought extra gunpowder to increase explosions. He even built a 2-clock bomb because he wanted his plan to succeed and couldn't take any chances. He also explained how he was able to set each clock with its runtime of 14 days, 144 hours, or 6 days in advance, accurate within 15 minutes to the time of the explosion. Elsa is now pregnant with George's child and they were planning to make changes and move away anytime now. But in the meantime, Elsa's husband caught them and abuses Elsa physically before George stops him. He threatened both of them and left the scene. George opened up to the officers that he was concerned about people's beliefs and rights. He was concerned about the conditions of the workers in the factories. He was concerned about the bloodshed that may take place because of the Nazis' actions. So he was convinced he had to do something about it and put an end to the high ranks, that is Hitler is the best way to do it. He said that it had to be done to avoid further bloodshed and this is the best way to do it. They wrote down everything he said. The superiors were still not convinced about his words and decided to opt for the last trial. Elsa gave birth to their baby but under unfortunate circumstances, he died. The couple was heartbroken after the news. George left the town for steelworks to make money and Elsa got divorced and stayed with George's mom waiting for George to come back. They were each other's true love and she promised to wait for him and he promised to come back soon. He joined the steelworks and the conditions there were terrible. People lived in misery. They were not even allowed basic human rights, including communicating with fellow humans. He and his friend who previously told him about steelworks managed to meet secretly. They used to snake in newspapers and magazines and listen to the radio to get information about the outside world. As time passed, George became more concerned about the brewing war with England. Too many innocent lives were at stake. Too many people were forced into labor. Too many people were suffering. Too many people were robbed of their chance to live life the way they wanted to. They were not allowed to have their own belief system. Even the basic needs and fundamental things were forbidden. George could not bear this and decided to take things into his own hands. He studied all the stolen newspapers and magazines. He collected information and always kept his ears open for more information. He studied the place where Hitler's speech was supposed to take place. He stole the necessities. They worked late hours. He designed and implemented everything to the point. He even had a backup bomb, that is 2 bombs if one went wrong, cause he did not want to take any chances. But unfortunately, Hitler left 13 minutes early, leaving him rotting in a cell while the people of his country were fighting. As a last try, the officials sedated George with drugs to get information out of him. But it did not work. They realized he was telling the truth all along and there is nothing that they can do now. There were 8 innocent lives lost due to that bomb blast, and he felt deeply sorry for that and said that he did it for the greater good and somehow the plan failed. When they questioned him another time, he said that he now wished to work along with them because he now believes that maybe his plan was never meant to happen and it's just the way things should be. During his questioning sessions, he took the help of the lady making note of all this to send a message to Elsa and his mother that he is alive. He also asked if she could apologize to the relatives of the innocent people who lost lives during that bomb blast. She was kind enough to help him, and she also gave him a photo of Elsa that he kept with him at all times as his emotional anchor during the following years. He was in prison for 5 years. A guard gave him an instrument during those years, and George spent his time smoking and playing the instrument while rotting in a cell. Over those 5 years, the situation in Germany got worse and worse. They were losing people. They were looking at war. It was just like George anticipated, and a lot of bloodsheds, all because of the way the higher ranks saw the society and how they ruled. He questioned everything about him and questioned how he could have failed so badly. If only he were successful, all this bloodshed might have been avoided. After waiting for 5 years, he wished to die in the fastest way possible. Although it was recorded that he died due to the terror attacks and fatal injuries, he was shot dead on April 9, 1945. This was known to only a few people and remained a secret. The Second World War claimed over 55 million lives. It took decades for Germany to recognize Georg Elser as a resistance fighter. Following her divorce, Elsa was married 2 more times, but she never got over the love of her life, George. She died in 1994. That's all for today's video, and thanks for watching it. If you liked it, make sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Also, let me know in the comments below which movie you want me to cover in the next video. Until next time, take care and stay tuned.